During the post-crisis phase in 1931, the Union was fully sovereign from the United Kingdom with the passage of the Statute of Westminster. What's up guys, and welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's Tesh. I hope you guys are well. Today's video is going to be about South Africa's independence and road to democracy. It's quite a fun one and quite an interesting one. I hope you guys stay to watch, and please drop a like, comment and subscribe. And at the end, you get to the end of the video, please go check out all my social medias. All links are in the description box down below. So let's get started. So I will be starting in 1910 and finishing in 1994. 1910 being the year that South Africa officially achieved its independence from Britain, and 1994 being the official year that South Africa achieved democracy from the Apartheid government. So the independence from Britain happened 8 years after the Second Boer War. Years before that, there were already anti-British policies among white South Africans who focused on independence. So the white South Africans I think they're talking about is, or who they are talking about is the Dutch and the Boer. This was obviously the reasons for the Second Boer War and the First Boer War. They were fighting for their independence or for control of the Cape Colony, as well as whatever other colony Britain had in South Africa that they ruled. So South Africa was part of the British Empire at some point. During Dutch and British colonial days, racial segregation was mostly informal, though some form of legislation had been created or enacted to control the settlement and movement of indigenous people, including the Native Locations Act of 1879 and the system of pass laws. So this is part of what we were taught in school, was the discrimination of indigenous people that lived in South Africa, that being the black community and whoever else was living in South Africa at the time that were indigenous to the land. 8 years after the Second Boer War, and after 4 years of negotiation, an Act of British Parliament granted nominal independence. This act was called the South African Act of 1909. While creating the Union of South Africa on the 31st of May 1910, the Union was a dominion that included the former territories of the Cape Colony, Transvaal, Natal colonies, as well as the Orange Free State Republic. In May 1910, General Louis Botha formed a government as Prime Minister. Elections were held in September, and the South African Party, headed by Botha and James Hertzog, won majority seats in the House, and the Union Party, headed by Dr. Leandra Jameson, won the least amount of seats. Botha formed a government as Prime Minister, and Parliament convened in November 1910, and Prime Minister Botha formed a government on December 14, 1912 again. This was all during the pre-crisis period. So now I'll be talking about the crisis period and the conflict periods that happened between 1913 to 1931. These were all dealing with segregation, discrimination. There was a lot of protests, there were a lot of acts, costs, and a whole lot of issues that were created for people of color during this time. This was just before apartheid had begun. During the crisis period, Parliament approved the Immigration Act in June 1913, which restricted the immigration and movement of Indians within the country. The Indians were led by Mohandas Gandhi, and they protested the discrimination, and Prime Minister Botha proclaimed martial law. In January the following year, just after miners went on strike near Johannesburg, just after Botha proclaimed the law, James Hertzog withdrew from the South African Party and established the National Party. After achieving concessions from the government and concerning treatment of the Indians in the country, Gandhi departed for India in July 1914. During the conflict phase, Afrikaners led by General Christian de Wet began a rebellion against the government in early September. Prime Minister Botha proclaimed martial law in September yet again, and the British government offered military assistance to the South African government, but they declined the offer the next month, and General C.F. Beyers, a leader of the Afrikaners, died in a drowning accident in December 1914. Some 30,000 South African troops, commanded by Prime Minister Botha and General Jan Christian Smuts, suppressed the Afrikaner rebellion in February 1915, and some 325 individuals, including 132 government soldiers and 190 rebels, were killed during the conflict. During the post-conflict phase, elections were held in October 1915, and the South African Party won the majority out of the House seats. Prime Minister Botha died just a few years later in August 1919, and General Smuts formed a government as Prime Minister just after that. Elections were held in March 1920, and the National Party won 44 out of 134 seats in the House, and the South African Party won 41 seats, and Smuts formed a coalition government. In November 1920, the following year, the South African Party and Union Party merged and the elections were held in February 1921, and the South African Party won the majority seats and the National Party won the least number of seats. In May, police and members of an African religious sector headed by Enoch Mgima clashed, resulting in the deaths of 163 Africans. In the beginning of 1922, coal miners and gold miners went on strike in Johannesburg, and soon after, union workers rebelled against the government in February. Towards the end of February, police and union workers clashed near Boksburg, resulting in the deaths of 180 workers and 50 policemen. Smuts declared martial law in Johannesburg in early March. Government troops suppressed the rebellion from 11th of March to the 14th, resulting in the deaths of 72 government soldiers and 81 civilians. Some 4,750 individuals were arrested and 18 individuals were sentenced to death for their involvement in the rebellion, though only 4 of them were actually executed. 2 years later, elections were held in June 1924, and the coalition of the National Party and Labour Party won 81 seats and out of 135 seats in the House. The South African Party only won 53 seats. James Hertzog formed a National Party and Labour Party coalition government as Prime Minister. Some 600 individuals were killed in the political violence between March 1915 and 1924. During the post-crisis phase in 1931, the Union was fully sovereign from the United Kingdom with the passage of the Statute of Westminster, which abolished the last powers of Parliament of the United Kingdom to legislate the country. In 1934, the South African Party and National Party merged to form the Union Party, seeking reconciliation between Afrikaners and English-speaking whites. In 1939, the party split over the entry of the Union into World War II as an ally of the United Kingdom, a move of which National Party followers strongly opposed. A few years later, after the war in 1948, began one of South Africa's biggest fights for democracy and independence. In that year, the National Party was elected into power. It strengthened the racial segregation which had begun under the Dutch and British colonial rule. Taking Canada's Indian Act as a framework, the nationalist government classified all people into 3 races, blacks, Indians, and coloureds, and developed the rights and limitations for each. The white minority, less than 20%, controlled the vastly larger black majority, and the legally institutionalized segregation became known as Apartheid. While whites enjoyed the highest standard of living in all of Africa comparable to the first world Western nations, the black majority remained disadvantaged by almost every standard, including income, education, housing, and life expectancy. The Freedom Charter, adopted in 1955 by the Congress of Alliance, demanded a non-racial society and an end to discrimination. On May 31st, 1961, the country became a republic following a referendum. The referendum removed Queen Elizabeth as the head of state, which narrowly passed because it was only open to white voters. The British dominated the Natal province, largely voted against the referendum. Sadly, their votes weren't a majority. And in 1961, Queen Elizabeth II lost the title of Queen of South Africa, and the last Governor-General, Charles Robert Swarts, became the state president. As a concession to Westminster system, the appointment of the president remained an appointment by Parliament and virtually powerless until P.W. Botha's Constitution Act of 1983, which eliminated the office of Prime Minister and instated a near-unique, strong presidency responsible to Parliament. Pressured by other Commonwealth nations, South Africa withdrew from the organization in 1961, and it only rejoined in 1994 under the Black President Nelson Mandela. Despite opposition both within the country and outside, the government legislated for continuation of apartheid. The security forces cracked down on internal dissent and violence became widespread, and the anti-apartheid organizations such as the African National Congress, the Azanian People's Organization, and the Pan-Africanist Congress carrying out guerrilla warfare and urban sabotage. The 3 rival resistance movements also engaged in an occasional interfactional clashes as they jockeyed for domestic influence. Apartheid became increasingly controversial, and several countries began to boycott businesses with the South African government because of its racial policies. These measures were later extended to the international sanctions and the divestment of holdings by foreign investors. In the late 1970s, South Africa initiated a program of nuclear weapon development. In the following decade, it produced 6 deliverable nuclear weapons. Makhlabatani's Declaration of Faith, signed by Mangosuthu Buthelezi and Harry Swartz in 1974, enshrined the principles of a peaceful transition of power and equality for all people of South Africa. The first of such agreements by black and white political leaders in South Africa. Ultimately, F.W. de Klerk opened a bilateral discussion with Nelson Mandela in 1993 for a transition of policies of government. In 1990, the National Party and government took the first step towards dismantling discrimination when it lifted the ban on the ANC and other political organizations. This also resulted in the release of Nelson Mandela from prison after 27 years, serving a sentence for sabotage. A negotiation process followed with the approval from the white electorate in 1992 referendum. The government continued negotiations, and apartheid South Africa also destroyed its nuclear arsenal and acceded to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. South Africa held its first universal elections in 1994, which the ANC won by an overwhelming majority. It has been in power ever since. The country rejoined the Commonwealth of Nations and became a member of the South African Development Community, SADC, the following year. And that is it for today's video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was quite interesting for me to do, as well as the research. I love doing this. I've also decided that every Friday I'll be coming out with a history video, and on a Wednesday I'll be doing a personal video, and on a Monday I'll be posting a vlog or whatever the case may be. But thank you for watching. Please drop a like, comment, and subscribe, and please go check out all my social medias linked down in the description box below, as well as all the articles linked down in the description as well that relate to my video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Ciao.